welcome to Church Matters, a podcast about how church matters in our community and our world. My name is Brian Gross, and I'm the rector of Christ Church in Cedar Rapids, here along with my co-host Chris Hubbs, also from Christ Church.
Hi there.
Today, we are privileged to have as our guest the Right Reverend Betsey Monnot. Reverend Betsey Monnot was consecrated the 10th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Iowa on December 18th, 2021, and incidentally and importantly is the first woman to be elected to that position since the diocese was formed in 1853. In addition to leading the diocese, Bishop Monnot serves in national and international groups in the area ecumenism, as well as serving on the boards of the Bishop Kemper School for Ministry and the Episcopal Church College for Bishops. Before coming to Iowa, Bishop Betsey served congregations of the Diocese of Northern California, as well as serving on the Bishop of Northern California's staff as the missioner for leadership development and networking, and she has done and continues to do extensive work with congregations in the areas of congregational development and vitality. She holds a bachelor's degree from Oberlin College, a master's degree from Harvard University, and a master's of divinity from the Church Divinity School of the Pacific. She lives in Des Moines, Iowa, with her husband and her teenage sons, and we appreciate you being here. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Great. Well, so as Brian just introduced our podcast, we have been calling it Church Matters, and Charles was really, really pleased with the cleverness of just that it was a double meaning, right? That it was about church matters and also about how the church matters.
Yes,
So as we think about that, how do you envision from your seat as the bishop here, how do you envision that the Episcopal Church matters or should matter to our communities?
I would say in a few different ways. So one, of course, the Episcopal Church exists in all different kinds of communities. Even in Iowa, we have 53 congregations in Iowa. And so if you think about it, that's more urban settings like Cedar Rapids, but also deeply, deeply rural settings, way out, far away from any other church. And I think that in both of those settings, the church matters in that we are carrying a very specific tradition of worship, of biblically based preaching, of spiritual interaction with one another, spiritual practices, that we are carrying that tradition, that Anglican tradition, to wherever the communities are that we are today. I would say, in particular, in many of our Iowa communities, another one of the ways that the Episcopal Church is super important is that in so many places across Iowa, the Episcopal Church is the only inclusive expression of Christianity that is available for folks within, a distance of, 100 miles even. So some of our tiny little rural congregations might be the only place that an LGBTQ person, for instance, might be able to find a Christian community that would accept them for who they are. I also feel like right now, broadly, the Episcopal Church has a lot of what this world needs. Folks are looking for authentic spiritual experiences, authentic spiritual practices that make a difference in their lives. And our tradition is rich and deep and full of those kinds of practices. And we are able to offer those kinds of experiences in ways that not every church and not every tradition can do.
I follow your account on Facebook, and I love watching and seeing the pictures as you do your visits. And I am struck by just the tiny size of some of those very rural congregations. But I'm encouraged by those as well, in the thought that they still have that desire to meet and to gather and worship and be a community in that way. And I guess I hadn't thought to put the piece together that also being inclusive and affirming communities that way in a way that's likely so otherwise unavailable, especially in those rural and fairly conservative parts of the state. So that's beautiful. That's a piece I really hadn't considered before.
Yeah, it is. That is something. I noticed that in our church, and I have a feeling in a lot of churches across the country, we're starting to see folks come into the church that are new to the church, those that are coming into the church from other denominations, perhaps, and it seems like we're seeing some folks of a different generation, a younger generation, coming to church, and I know that some of those folks certainly are coming because of that inclusivity and what we can offer spiritually and all. What do you see behind the drive for folks these days, really kind of turning to religion or a deeper sense of spirituality?
Yeah, and what you're seeing there at Christ Church, I think, is happening in other congregations across the diocese as well. Certainly, for instance, St. Paul's Cathedral in Des Moines, Trinity in Iowa City, Trinity Cathedral in Davenport are all seeing. And so these congregations are some of our larger congregations that just maybe have more stuff going on, and maybe more visibility in their communities, and more younger people around them probably is part of it as well, right? But we are seeing in those places exactly the same thing that you're seeing at Christ Church. Folks coming in, newer folks, younger folks, maybe from different traditions or maybe from no tradition at all. What it seems to me now, of course, I'm at a different level, right? I'm not working directly with these folks, but I do have the privilege of coming in sometimes and confirming or receiving them. And so what I hear from folks when I chat with them about, what brought you to this day, what brought you to wanting to be confirmed or received in the Episcopal Church is frequently that folks were looking for a spiritual home that felt like it offered them a place to grow, a place to develop, a place to go deeper into their spiritual life. Right now, we as a culture are moving into what scholars are calling the age of authenticity, which is a time in which we're moving out of what they're referred to as the age of association, right? Where folks would gather in what they call voluntary associations, which would be any kind of thing like an Elks Club or a Rotary or a church, right? And that's where people found meaning simply by being part of these associations. Folks don't join groups anymore just to join groups. Folks join groups if they think that group will change their life in some positive way, will have a positive effect on their own life in a way that they want. And people are coming to the Episcopal Church, I think, because we offer that, because of the spiritual practices we offer, because of the spiritual community, because we are openly, out loud, following Jesus or doing our best to follow Jesus. And I think that that's what folks are looking for. Here's a community that is actually paying attention to what Jesus said and what Jesus's commandments were. Love God, love your neighbor, love even your enemy, right? And let's try to do that together.
I suspect when Brian phrased that question that he says, younger people coming from other denominations that I fit in that category that he's thinking of, and I appreciate the younger bit, even though I don't necessarily feel younger all the time. But I do resonate with a ton of those characteristics that you just described, and as in my own journey out of evangelical and a real kind of fundamentalist evangelical upbringing and church involvement, and then coming to the Episcopal Church and finding the richness and the depth and the ability to really follow Jesus and his teachings with more than just the lip service of we've done it to how the the pastor says we're supposed to, along with all of the approved sort of political overtones that brings. And I wonder then, and I've asked myself the question repeatedly over the last couple of years, and then I wonder your thoughts on how we make the presence or the availability of the Episcopal Church and these congregations known and out there to the people, because I run across people younger than me who I knew in those evangelical churches, who then I see in person on social media expressing their discontent or their frustration with some of the more conservative churches that we were in together. And I'm like, hey guys, over here, there's good stuff. Finding the ways to how to communicate that, right? How to get that out there. And maybe I'm going to answer my own question and be a terrible podcast host and say, maybe it's that easy as far as saying, guys, hey, look over here. I found something good. But I'm curious your thoughts there. If you see that, or if you have other thoughts on how we just get that level of maybe visibility to what's already here, because it's amazing. And I didn't realize it until I got here.
Yeah. Chris, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Oh, please.
How did you hear about the Episcopal Church? What brought you to Christ Church?
Oh boy. So we more or less dropped out of church during COVID. I had been super involved, led ministries, done all the things. We were there every time the door was open, hit a breaking point, went nowhere. In the interim, during COVID, one of my children came out and identifying as part of the LGBTQ community. And it was very clear to me and my wife at that point that when/if we went back to church, finding a church where my children knew that they were welcome and loved as they were for who they are was table stakes. Mm-hmm. That was the starting point. And everything after that, okay, now I could go into, okay, how am I comfortable with what's taught and knowing that I'm going to have to do a bunch of my own unpacking regardless. But then the theology and the worship and the community and other things could be after that. But if they weren't going to be welcome, that for me, that was the starting point. And then being the nerd that I am, I was like, well, I know how to search Google. This was back probably in the day before I was asking, OpenAI or ChatGPT or whatever, right? It was just, okay, church directory. Which are the places I know I can weed out? Which are the places I know I can consider? And it became a fairly short list. And then we just had to gin up the courage on a Sunday to show up and actually walk in the door. And Libby Slappy was the first person that caught us on the way in the door. Hi, you guys, you look new. Here's what you need to know. And we were here at that point. Maybe we just need a Libby at every door welcoming people, and that would do it.
Yeah, I like what you said about you needed to gin up the courage to walk through the door on a Sunday morning. And so like before that, it's not hard to do the research on your computer. And after that, you got a Libby there who's helping you. And a lot of our congregations do have folks who are, able to welcome folks once they get through the door. But that moment of, okay, now I'm going to walk through the door. And I was curious about your own story because, you were asking me like, how do people find the church? And it seems to me that there are certainly a certain number, there's a percentage that finds it the same way that you did, right? That maybe Google's LGBTQ friendly church or something like near me, oh, Christ Episcopal Church, awesome. Also, there's a statistic, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I share it on many of my visitations that if you ask a group of Episcopalians, how did they first come to the Episcopal Church or that church, they'll say that that they were invited by a friend or a family member. And then if you ask the same group of Episcopalians, how many of them have invited somebody to church within the last year, most of the hands go back down. So I think it actually even can be as simple as what you say. Come on over here. Hey, look over this. How about this thing that I've discovered? And we do. We try to have as much of a web presence as we can. The Diocese of Iowa has a web page. I have a Facebook page. We do what we can, but at some point, I really do think that personal invitation is a huge thing because folks who are not churched are not necessarily going to respond to an invitation from a church. Like, well, what do I care about that? I know you just want my money, you just want my soul, you want my time, but they might respond to an invitation from a friend.
The other day I was talking to somebody that's been going here for a little while, and then she had said why she came here, or the things that she had witnessed us do in public and through social media and different things that we've been involved in the community, and that drew her in. And she'd gotten to the point then where she wanted to know, so what do you guys stand for? What is your, what is the Episcopal Church? So it's interesting that was asked secondarily. The primary thing seemed to be where do you stand? What's your involvement in the community? Where are you in the world? And you're intersecting with the world in a way that seems the way I would see a church to be intersecting with the world. As a bishop, then, are there pressing issues right now that you think need some clarity, moral clarity, religious clarity, spiritual clarity, ethical clarity coming from the church, from a bishop to society, and things that are happening right now?
It's really hard to even think about that question for half a second without immediately reflecting on the state of conflict that our culture and society is in right now. The deep, deep divides that feel like they're getting deeper. Folks are positioning themselves on opposite sides and apart from each other, and unwilling to offer anybody who they even perceive to be on the other side any semblance of grace or recognition that maybe that person is in fact a decent human being who simply disagrees with a few things. And I think that's true on both sides. I certainly, as you know, have spoken and written and whatever publicly on some particular issues. I always hear, not too much because I don't have that big of a profile, but there are always a few inappropriately worded, angry responses that I don't respond to. Whether it's an email or a comment on a Facebook post or something like that. And then there are some that are maybe more thoughtful, and I do try to respond to those. And what I'm getting at is that I think that one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now as a society is our collective willingness to dehumanize people who think differently than we do. Whichever side it's on, the anger and the antipathy, I think it can grow so huge that we lose the ability to remember that person is also a child of God. And maybe they are deeply wrong about everything that I hold to be really important, but they are a child of God, and they are my neighbor, and I am called to love them. And they too are deserving the dignity that every human being deserves. They too are beloved by God and somebody that can bring Christ to me, right? Seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself, not just the persons that you are friends with or more politically aligned with. I feel like that's where the church can be. It's a huge challenge, and it's especially a challenge to remain firmly rooted in the gospel values that I think are being ignored by large swaths of our society. And this becomes like, that moves into the political sphere, right? Because then people say, well, what about these other gospel values? I've been recently accused of not caring about the victims of crimes perpetrated by undocumented immigrants, because I have been very public about my concern about the way Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is treating people in general, and immigrants in particular, whether undocumented or not. And that is an example, I think, of that willingness to dehumanize, right? Like, if it's not really two sides, I can care both about, and we all can care about victims of violent crimes of any kind perpetrated by anybody, and we can care about people who are being targeted for their race or for their accent and being abused at the hands of federal agents. We can be worried about both of those. We can care about both of those sets of people. And you know who else we can care about is the agents themselves. I'm deeply concerned about what is happening in the hearts and in the minds of ICE agents who find themselves put in this position of basically being public bullies, even to the extent of harming others. Like, what does that do to you? It's going to be awful.
Yeah. You recently got back from a trip to Minneapolis.
I did.
Yeah. And so to stand with the refugees, immigrants, migrants, just what takeaways did you have from that after that? It had to have been a fairly intense experience.
Yeah, it was an intense experience. So I went as one of several clergy from this diocese in response to a call that had gone out across the country for clergy to come and be there for 2 days. I kind of have two major takeaways from my time there, and one was that outside of Minneapolis, we really didn't have a sense of, I'm talking about like us in Iowa, right? The rest of the country, even as aware as we might try to be, watching the news, social media, whatever it would be, it was hard for us to really have a sense of the depth and breadth of the impact of Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis. I mean, it changed everything about the city of Minneapolis and the way people went about their daily lives. Everybody, not just undocumented immigrants, everybody. People would take vacation days off of work so that they could stand outside their children's preschool, taking shifts with other parents to guard, so that somebody would be aware if ICE was, coming to the neighborhood. I mean, it's American citizens, white American citizens, right? So again, not only an impact against convicted criminals who were undocumented. That was intense to just come to really recognize how many stories and how many lives, everybody's lives, that were affected by that, and the way of life just completely upended. But the other piece, and this is super important, the other piece was that in the midst of all of that, what sprang up, what bubbled up from the ground were these networks of neighbors loving neighbors, neighbors serving neighbors, neighbors simply being there for each other and helping each other to get what they needed, whether it was people offering rides to folks so they could get back and forth to school or to work safely, whether it's people donating to help pay somebody's rent so that they don't get evicted because they haven't been able to be paid because they're too afraid to go to work, or people who are volunteering with food bank type organizations to simply go directly to the grocery store, pay for the groceries themselves, and deliver them. It was a kind of the kingdom of God just springing up around this disaster that was imposed on folks. Hearing those stories gave me, renewed faith in the goodness of humanity, in just the common person, whoever it is, to recognize that their neighbor is somebody who they are responsible for. And I'm going to love you. And that means I'm going to go to the store and get you some Tylenol to give it to you, to bring it back to you because you just had surgery and you can't leave your house. And, you hurt.
It does sound remarkably like loving God and then loving your neighbor in very practical ways. I remember reading somebody on social media make the crack that the one thing that the government agents really hadn't counted on was the fact that Minnesota was full of Lutheran church ladies who had been preparing their whole lives for this. And
Right.
I'd like to think that it also is probably true of Episcopal church folk as well. But such a tangible opportunity in a way. Like I suspect that we in Iowa we have lots of people who would have trained all their lives for the same kind of thing and haven't had such a pressing opportunity put in front of them that the need was so stark. I think a little bit of like the response from different networks during COVID and the way people helped, and that was even a little different. The challenges had a different face to them. Having that opportunity so clearly available to go do real things, and yet I can't quite imagine. And we live one state away, right? Being put in a position where I needed to go take a day off work because it would be helpful for my community and my neighbors if I, as a 6'4" middle-aged white man, went and stood outside the preschool or the elementary school to make sure that my kids and their friends were safe for the day. It's just stunning.
Yeah, I think it's a reminder that as a church, not to get too comfortable, to be ready. That not ready in a sense of doom or anything, but be ready to be there for the neighbor. That not just to sit back and watch the world go by, but to be part of it. Be part of the kingdom. Be part of the kingdom of God, and bring that to our neighbors and help out.
And it was those networks that already existed that I think that exist in Iowa and also already existed in Minneapolis that were brought to bear and strengthened and then broadened in what we saw there.
Yeah.
Let me say one other thing because it's coming to my mind, and it has that great word ecumenism in it too, which is so fun. Another piece of what I see as my ministry as diocesan bishop, this is specifically diocesan bishop, is in connecting folks, right? So connecting churches to each other, connecting individuals to each other, connecting churches to their communities, or encouraging those connections. Because again, it's not like I'm in the Elks Club telling the church to, inviting the church to come out, but I'm encouraging those connections in every way that I can. And a lot of time that's through other people, through members of my staff. But the ecumenism piece comes in through our full communion agreement right now with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, and the ways that we are across the state of Iowa. So it's one diocese and 3 ELCA synods, but across the whole state, working to connect our congregations in towns and rural areas where they can help support each other. So we have more and more of those connections growing and blooming. And I'm also very hopeful that in 2027, we will enter a full communion agreement with the United Methodist Church, which would be more opportunities for connection across the state. There are lots of Methodists across the state, and becoming closer to our siblings in Christ, right? Moving closer together as one church, the one church that Jesus imagined, the unity, I guess, is that Jesus imagined, that when he prayed that his followers would be one, as he and the Father are one, that is good for the kingdom of God. And so that's something I'm excited about.
When I was received into the Episcopal Church after a lifetime in evangelical churches, largely Baptist and independent kind of churches, one of the things that struck me so clearly was every other church I'd been a member of, it was just a member of that congregation, because the congregations were effectively self-governing, even if they were aligned with a denomination. That was a pretty token alignment. There wasn't a lot of engagement. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't the kind of affinity between congregations that I get the sense of immediately when I'm here. So became a member here, was received into membership here. A few weeks later, traveled to Nebraska where my kid goes to college, and went, there's an Episcopal church right on the campus here in Lincoln. This is the same Episcopal church of which I'm a member, like not my home congregation, but there was this light bulb moment of, wait a second, I'm a part of something even a little bit bigger than just Christ Church in Cedar Rapids, where I was received and I worship when I'm at home. But then to think about that in conjunction with what you just said, which was as we get closer ties with the ELCA, with the United Methodists, both of which are meaningful to me as I think about it, because those are the two denominations that my grandparents were members of their entire lives. But it's encouraging to hear expressed more tangibly the reality of those ties. We talk about unity in Christ, and in so many churches, at least that I've been a part of and seen, that unity kind of is maybe all the way to the church door and not any further than that. And so as we encourage that amongst our congregations, it's encouraging to me to think about how that reaches as believers then is further out, and that community is larger than we maybe visualize on a Sunday morning.
All right. Are there other things that maybe we haven't hit on that you would like to talk about, discuss?
Well, so one of your questions was like, what's the craziest thing I'd ever seen as a bishop?
Yeah.
So I was all prepared for that one.
Great.
Well, so what's the craziest thing you've ever seen as a bishop?
Well, thanks for asking. I actually want to answer the question slightly differently.
All right.
Because I'm not sure I'm at liberty to say some of the crazy things that I've experienced as a bishop. However, I would love to tell you a story about something that happened in my congregation back in Sacramento early in the days that we got there. It was Sunday morning Eucharist, and I was presiding, and bread and wine, and you do the whole thing, and then everybody receives and all of that. And then when I think I had the paten with the remaining bread, and we didn't have a deacon, so I was cleaning up the table, and whoever had the chalice put it on the table. And I looked at the chalice because my practice was always to simply consume, unless it was too much, whatever was remaining. And I looked in there, and there was a little bit of wine, and then there was also an unidentified round object in the bottom of the chalice. And I thought, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to drink this right now.
Yeah.
And so I put it to the side over on the credence table after worship. This was a church shaped very much like Christ Church, right? With an aisle, and you process out, and then you greet everybody at the door. And so after all of that was over, I went back up to the front, to the altar area, and over into the sacristy where the altar guild was. And I said, God bless the altar guild. What was that? What was going on? And my wonderful altar guild lady said, well, I drank that wine, and it was a jelly bean, and I decided that it was probably holy. And so I just crossed myself and ate it. And I said, well, thank you. So the mystery that exists to this day is how exactly an intact jelly bean got into the bottom of a chalice full of consecrated wine.
Oh my goodness.
I'm reminded of a saying that my mother-in-law, who is an overseas missionary, once repeated about being on the field. And where he leads me, I will follow. What he feeds me, I will swallow. I don't know how firmly I'd embrace that, but
maybe it's a consecrated jelly bean. I don't know.
It's a consecrated jelly bean.
It's the bringing together of the secular Easter tradition and Eucharist. Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, I think our time's about up anyway. I really appreciate you being here and joining us today. It was a wonderful conversation. I know that we have lots of other things that we could go on and talk about, and one day maybe we'll have that opportunity. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you, Chris, for also helping out again today. Charles wasn't with us today as he was sick, so he did give us a couple of questions to ask, and we did not ask those, but you're not here, you don't get asked the question. So anyway.
Well, maybe next time. It's been a lot of fun for me. So thank you so much for inviting me.
I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening in. We'll see you again next time.